Hello, everyone, and welcome to the April 18th, 2018 public session of the Halton District School Board. I want to remind everybody that the meeting is video and voice recorded, and if you have any really loud devices, maybe put them on silent. That would be much appreciated. I want to acknowledge that Chair Gerbentz will be absent this evening, and if she's watching, wish her all the best in her singing endeavors this evening. She's quite an accomplished songstress, and her mates are putting on a show and practicing for their big competition, so all the best to her and her colleagues. So I would like to other than that, I believe everybody's here. Our superintendents will be joining us shortly. And I'd like to hand it over to Trustee Pappen for the acknowledgement of traditional lands.
Thank you. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, I would like to ask for any declarations of conflict of interest. Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we'll look at the agenda. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve the agenda? Okay, moved by Trustee Gray, seconded by Trustee Amos. Is there any discussion on that? Okay, seeing none. Will you vote? Okay, perfect. Thanks very much. That passes unanimously. And we are on to item 2.3, presentations. And I would like to invite Lisa Risotto to the space up here for speaking. Lisa is with the Center for Skills Development and Training. Thanks so much for being here. Make yourself at home.
Okay. I'm just going to read. I didn't bring a PowerPoint. Good evening. My name is Lisa Risotto, and I am the Chief Administrative Officer at the Center for Skills Development and Training. As you may know, the Center is a not-for-profit, arm's-length affiliate of the Halton District School Board and has been in operation in its current form since 1998. So we will soon be celebrating our 20th anniversary. The Center is headquartered in Burlington as one of 11 sites throughout Halton and Peel. 7 are managed by the Center and 4 are itinerant sites. Of those associated with Halton District School Board, Stuart Miller is president of the Center's Board of Directors, and David Bogue and Leah Reynolds are ex officio directors among our 10-member board. Since I presented to you last year, and now serving as CAO for almost 2 years, the Center has emerged from a period of significant change in its leadership team, organizational structure, and physical locations. We also launched our 2017-2020 strategic plan with help from the Center's board, community partners, and funders. The implementation of our strategies helps a wide variety of people get on a path to career success, attaining our vision of sustainable and meaningful employment for everyone. Our clients range from young people just starting out to mid-career career changers and job seekers to newcomers to Canada who are settling in the community. We also assist local employers by supporting their recruitment, hiring, and training needs. The Centre offers programs and services such as English as a second language and settlement services for newcomers to Canada, employment counseling services for job seekers, and pre-apprenticeship skills trades training. These programs are provided with the support of federal and provincial government funding and the support of many community partners. So when individuals develop skills, become job ready, and go on to find sustainable, meaningful work, it has a huge impact on their personal and family life. This in turn has positive impacts in our communities and to our economy. It creates great pride to have Centre staff contribute to client success stories, to hear firsthand the life-changing impact they have on the lives of our clients. We have over 100 highly dedicated staff who are passionate about helping our clients improve their situations. Since I presented to you last May, we have celebrated success around various key performance indicators for our last fiscal year. And I just said to Leah, it was fantastic when I was writing this to be able to share so many success stories. So we've served over 27,000 clients and organizations. We've helped 19 people find employment. We've implemented programs with the highest funding revenues in our history. We've hosted MPs, MPPs, and other VIPs at our main site and provided many tours of our skilled trade centers. We've obtained 3-year funding of nearly $2 million for our Get in Gear skilled trades program for at youth risk. We just obtained 3-year funding of over $1 million for our Women in Skilled Trades program to help women break into the home construction industry. And for the first time ever, they're actually going to be paid minimum wage to be in the program. We've offered an ESL and skilled trades combination program for Syrian refugees, and then later offered that program to a variety of newcomers to Canada, thereby reducing employment barriers and making newcomers more adaptable to the new work culture they face. We delivered 230,000 hours of ESL training and helped over 3,700 immigrants with ESL and community settlement. We assisted over 400 companies to recruit, hire, and train employees. We administered 105 grants for 73 companies, providing nearly $1.3 million in employer training subsidies under the Canada-Ontario Job Grant. We launched a innovative tiny homes program in partnership with the Rotary Club of Oakville Trafalgar, providing environmental sustainability and the long-term goal of offering affordable housing options. We launched a new website and increased our social media engagement. And this coming Friday, 2 managers from the leadership team and I will be attending an awards ceremony where we'll be honored with 2 Burlington Post Reader's Choice Awards for Best Adult Education and Best Learning Center. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you tonight. It is extremely rewarding to serve as the Centre's CAO, and I'm highly appreciative of the support from Stuart and the Board of Directors. I look forward to sharing future updates with you about the Centre's continued progress and success. And I'm pleased to answer any questions, as I realize that was a lot of information.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Trustee Gray.
Thank you very much, and through the chair to Lisa. First of all, congratulations for this fabulous report and all the success that you've reported tonight about the activities of the Centre for Skills and Development and Training. I think every trustee here in the room recognizes the importance of this programming in our communities and the profound effect it has on individuals. Your report was so filled with such wonderful news and data and stats. I wonder if you could share that electronically with all of us in the board, because I'm sure that as we meet with community members and through our school council community meetings, there's some great news that needs to be shared and needs to be found in our community. And with members of the media present here tonight, it may resonate also for them to pick up some of the great news from your report. Thank you.
I would be happy to share, and I've brought annual reports as well to leave behind.
Thank you. Trustee Reynolds.
Through the chair, To our guest, thank you so much for bringing your report. I echo a lot of the comments that Trustee Gray had shared. We're thrilled that you came to share the good news. And thank you for continuing to transform lives, improve our workforce and our economy with the work that you do. And well done that you've got 2 awards coming from the Burlington Best. So we want to see some pictures.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Miller.
Through you, Chair Al Harrison, to Ms. Risotto, Lisa. I want to also acknowledge the work of Lisa as the leader of that, the Center for Skills and Development. It's a fantastic, and you've heard the data and the results of what they've done. They have served many, many people, some who have had great challenges in their life, refugees, people who have escaped war, escaped famine, and they've come to this country, and the Center for Skills and Development has helped these people get a footing in this country and in this community and look for success in the community in their working lives. And that the staff at the center is brilliant, but the staff is only as brilliant as the leader. And I want to acknowledge that to Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
So on behalf of the trustees and everyone here, thanks so much for all the work that you and your team are doing. I have the great pleasure to work with Joe around Get in Gear and the Supervised Alternative Learning Program. And it always inspires me to hear his enthusiasm and the solutions that he's able to help some of our most vulnerable students with. So thank you for that and for everything.
Thank you.
Much appreciated, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are moving on to item 2.3.2, Education Development Charges, Policy and Bylaw Public Meeting. Okay, so I'd like to invite our guests to come forward, please. And I have some opening remarks. I do have opening remarks. The Halton District School Board is proposing to enact an Education Development Charges bylaw, which will apply to land in the region of Halton. The new bylaw is required because the current bylaw of the board is scheduled to expire on June 24th, 2018. As part of the presentation agenda item pertaining to education development charges, the board will be conducting 2 public meetings this evening as part of the process of passing the new bylaw. The first public meeting will deal with a review of the current EDC policies of the board as reflected in its EDC bylaw. The second public meeting will address the proposed bylaw that the board anticipates passing next month. The Education Act, which is the legislation that governs these EDCs, requires that the board convene 2 public meetings before passing a new bylaw. The primary purpose of any board in implementing education development charges is to provide a source of funding for new school sites. These are not funded by a grant under the province's funding model. The EDC calculation is based on new pupils that will be generated by housing units within the bylaw area, for which building permits will be issued over the next 15-year planning period and for which additional school accommodation is required. The board has worked in close cooperation with the Halton Catholic District School Board in developing the proposed education development charges for each board. The boards cooperated closely in working through the background analysis respecting growth projections, pupil enrollment forecasts, determination of growth-related pupil place requirements, site costing, and in completing their respective EDC forms through continuing discussions. The Catholic Board held its EDC public meetings last night. We are seeking input from the public tonight and will give consideration to their submissions prior to the passage of the new Education Development Charges bylaw. In addition to the 2 public meetings being held tonight, school board staff, consultants, and legal counsel held a stakeholder meeting with representatives of the development industry and the area municipalities on March 23, 2018, to respond to their inquiries and to provide an overview of the proposed education development charge bylaw. We have also advertised extensively, and we're going to be hearing more about that advertisement this evening. As you may be aware, the board will likely be giving final consideration to the passage of an EDC bylaw at the board meeting scheduled for May 16th, 2018. The agenda for this evening's meeting has been provided, and we're going to begin the proceeding with the policy review public meeting, followed by the public meeting for the proposed bylaw. The consultant and the lawyer for the board will make presentations in both meetings. Members of the public will also be invited to address the board. However, seeing no members of the public at this point, there may be a last-minute rush. We don't know. But perhaps that part of the meeting will be somewhat truncated. So at this point in time, we'll commence the presentations with Jack Amendolia of Watson and Associates, the board's economic consultant.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to the board for having us here. I think when you see the three of us in front of you at this stage of the game, you know it's EDC related. So as was mentioned, really tonight is about fulfilling two requirements for two public meetings. The first is the policy review, and then we'll talk about the proposed new bylaw passage. So I'm going to start this evening by talking to you about the policy review meeting. So every board that has an existing EDC bylaw in place must do a review of its existing EDC policy. So that this fulfills the requirement of the EDC legislation to have a policy review meeting. In addition, we prepare a policy review report that goes through the policies in detail, similar to what I'll speak to you about this evening, and that's been released to the public as well. So the Ministry of Education legislation states that each board that has an existing bylaw must conduct a review of its policies. The legislative authority comes from section 257.60, subsection 1 of the Education Act. And the policies that we're going to go through tonight that deal with the EDC bylaw, it's important for the trustees and the public to be aware that when we talk about EDC policies, they're contained within the EDC bylaw, and they're different from a typical board policy like an attendance boundary policy or a transportation policy. So that's important for trustees to be aware of. So the first policy that we're going to talk about tonight has to do with the percentage of growth-related net education land costs to be borne through EDCs. So really what that says is if we have to collect a certain amount of money for new school sites over the 15 years, are we going to collect all of that through EDCs, or are we going to decide to collect less than 100% of that? And why you would collect less than 100% would be by granting certain exemptions. And when we talk about exemptions, it should be understood that there's two exemptions in the EDC legislation. There's a statutory exemption, so those are exemptions that the board must give. So on the residential side, for example, if you have a single family home and you want to turn that home into a duplex, you want to turn it into 2 apartments, you would not pay an EDC if you built that additional apartment in your single family home. So that's something that the board has to exempt, and we work that into the calculation. On the non-residential side, another example is municipalities and school boards, institutional uses, they're exempt from education development charges. So that's something, again, that's not a voluntary exemption. The school board has to do that, and we work that into the calculation. However, if the board granted a non-statutory exemption, and the best way to think about it is a voluntary exemption. So let's say we wanted to exempt all seniors housing or something like that, then what the trustees need to understand is that would incur revenue loss. So if we were expecting to collect a certain amount of dollars from a certain unit type and we exempted that unit type, not because the legislation told us to, but because we decided to, then that's a revenue loss, and the board would have to come up with those funds somewhere else. And the reason I talk about this is in our work, often we'll talk with municipalities, your local municipalities, and they may say, hey, we have an exemption for whatever. And we might come back and say, look, you guys have the tax base to draw on. We would love to give that same exemption, but we just don't have an alternate funding source. So EDCs typically charge as much as they can, what's reasonable, because that's really the only funding source the board has to go out and buy new school sites. So that's really the message I want to get across with regard to exemptions in voluntary and non-voluntary. Next thing with regard to policies we're going to speak about are jurisdiction-wide versus area municipal. So the legislation allows school boards to have an EDC that's uniform across their entire jurisdiction, and that's how your board's EDC currently works, whether you're in Milton or Burlington or Oakville or Halton Hills, you pay one rate. Or if the board wanted to, they can decide to have different rates for different municipalities, different rates for different developments. It's really limitless in what or how you want to divide up the jurisdiction. Right now, of all the existing bylaws in Ontario, the vast majority, and I could only think of one off the top of my head, that's not applied on a jurisdiction-wide basis. And the one that is area-specific is very unique circumstance in that the city that has an area-specific bylaw is really the only part of the board's jurisdiction that has any growth at all. All the other bylaws, especially all the other ones in the GTA, like your board, are applied uniformly across the board's jurisdiction, which is consistent with how the board provides the majority of its services. Next policy we're going to talk about has to do with residential versus non-residential costs. So right now, your board's EDC bylaw charges 85% of its education land costs to residential development and 15% to non-residential development. The legislation allows boards to charge anywhere from 0% to non-residential all the way up to 40% of their EDC to non-residential. The average right now around the province, and it has been really since the 90s, is a 90 to 10 split. So 85-15, which your board has had, I think, since the inception of EDCs, is right around the average. And these are things that we also go out to the stakeholders or development community and say, is there any willingness, is there any feedback as to why we should go back to the trustees and say, please reconsider a different allocation? And so far, we've heard none. So 85-15, like I said, has been the allocation for as long as you guys have had EDCs and is right around the average around the province. The next policy has to do with uniform charges for all types of development or differentiated charges. So what this refers to is right now, whether you're building or taking out a building permit for a single family home, a townhouse, or an apartment, you pay the same EDC rate regardless of what type of development you're building. And that's, again, consistent with every existing bylaw in the province. So back in when EDC legislation initially came out, you were only able to charge in this way. You were only able to charge one rate regardless of development. So that's a little bit different than how municipalities and regions typically charge, as they usually charge different rates depending on the density of your development. Back in 2002, a change was made to the Ontario regulations which govern EDCs to allow boards, not force, but allow boards to decide whether they want to continue with a uniform rate or they want to go with a differentiated rate. Since that change got made in 2002, like I mentioned, no board has elected to go with a differentiated rate. And similar to what I mentioned with the res, non-res split, these are the types of things that we go out to the people who are paying the majority of the EDCs, the developers, and we ask them, do you want to see a differentiated charge? Here's what it looks like uniformly, and here's what it looks like differentiated. And again, to date, we haven't heard, and this goes across the province, but with specific regard to your board and the stakeholder sessions we've had, so far we haven't, the development community has not expressed a desire to change from the uniform rate that you've had historically. And the last two policies, one deals with operating budget surplus and one deals with alternative accommodation arrangements. These are a little bit different from the other ones in that the board actually passes statements with regard to these policies, and you guys have already done so. So what the first one is, the operating budget surplus, what it says is that if the board has a surplus in their operating budget and they deem, so it doesn't say that if you have a surplus, it automatically goes to EDCs, but it says if you have a budget surplus in your operating funds and you deem that they can be used to offset EDCs, then the Board of Trustees can make that decision. In this past EDC bylaw, the board has determined that I don't think there is a surplus, and if there was a surplus, it wouldn't be used to offset EDCs. It would go to other areas of the board. And then with alternative accommodation arrangements policy, what that says is that if the board can enter into an arrangement either with a coterminous school board or a municipality or some other partner that would have the effect of reducing your EDC costs, then they should do so, and if not, explain why there hasn't been that opportunity, and your board has explained why those opportunities haven't arisen. So that concludes the EDC policies. I'd be happy to take any questions with regard to the policies, and if there's no questions, Mr. Teichman is going to explain some of the requirements that the board must go through to pass an EDC bylaw.
There are no questions, so please go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. I'm just going to briefly address the 3 or 4 main requirements the school board has to satisfy in order to have the authority under the Education Act to pass an education development charge bylaw. And this is a new bylaw, and it will replace the current bylaw that will expire. It's going to expire June 24th. So the main requirements are the board has to hold a policy review public meeting. That's the meeting we're holding right now. The board has to hold a public meeting to deal with the proposed bylaw. That's the meeting scheduled to follow immediately after this one. The board has to prepare a background study. Jack prepared that, and it's on the board's website. It's been circulated to the public, and I'm sure members of the board. The board has to advertise these public meetings. It has to give 20 days notice to the public. The board did, and that was the notice of these meetings was published in all the local papers, posted on the board's website, as well as staff, Dom, Jack, and I, we ensured that the notice was circulated to members of the development industry, and in particular the sort of the umbrella organization, which is the Building and Industry and Land Development Association. So we did that, and the final requirement is, and so for those requirements, the public meeting, the background study, notice to the public, those will all have been satisfied as of tonight. The final requirement is securing ministry approval of the student projections and the number of school sites that underlie the calculation of the charge. We don't have that yet. Typically, the board will receive the director will receive a letter from the minister's office the day before the board intends to pass the bylaw saying we have ministry approval of those matters. So the board's scheduled to pass the bylaw on May 16, so we can expect that May 15, May 14. But apart from that, the board has satisfied all the requirements it needs to address in order to pass the bylaw on May 16, which is the date where the board is scheduled to consider passing the bylaw. We don't presume that the board will make the decision and thinks is appropriate, of course, but that meeting has been set aside to deal with that. So those are the main requirements, and the board's positioned to pass the bylaw in May. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I did a poor job of introducing you, Mr. Brad Teichman of Overland LLP, the board's legal counsel. Thank you very much. Trustees have received an electronic submission from BUILD. As you said, that's the Building Industry and Land Development Association this afternoon. And other than that, it does not appear that there are any delegates or further submissions of any type in this regard. So this concludes the policy review public meeting. Now I'm just going to ask here, do we need a motion to receive the information? Yes, we do. Okay. Would somebody be willing to move this motion? Be it resolved that the Halton District School Board receive as information the EDC policies verbal report from Watson and Associates, and that the Halton District School Board receive it as information the legislative requirements verbal report from Overland LLP, and that the Halton District School Board receive as information the written presentation regarding education development charges policy review. Moved by Trustee Oliver, seconded by Trustee Collard. Is there any discussion? Okay, Trustee Collard.
Just wondering if we need to waive the rules in order to make this motion this evening, since it is first appearing tonight.
Okay, yes, thank you for that.
And if so, then I would move that.
Okay, thank you very much. So motion to waive the rules to deal with it this evening made by Trustee Collard. Is there a seconder for that motion? Trustee Pappen, thank you very much. And since it's not in here, it is in here because General Manager Gort Maker is very awesome and efficient. Okay, so please vote. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, and that passes unanimously. And now the motion on the floor is to receive the information as I just read. So I believe that has been moved and seconded. So I'm going to, okay. Okay, that is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. And then we need a motion to adjourn the policy review public meeting. So would somebody be willing to make that motion? Trustee Gray, seconded by Trustee Amos. Okay.
Jean and Kelly.
Okay. And that is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, so we will now commence the public meeting concerning the proposed bylaws and the background studies. During this public meeting, we will be inviting our consultants to give an overview of the process and methodology supporting the proposed changes. We'll also be asking our lawyer to explain briefly the text of the bylaw, which is found in the background study. So I will turn it over to Mr. Amendalia to make a presentation on the proposed EDC.
Hello again. So as was mentioned, this next part of the presentation is going to deal with the proposed bylaw. So the EDC, as many of you already know, is a development charge that's imposed under a bylaw respecting growth-related net education land costs incurred or proposed to be incurred by a school board. So basically what it is a charge that's incurred or that people pay when you take out a building permit, and those funds go to the board to buy new school sites and to prepare those school sites. The board currently has an EDC bylaw that, as I mentioned in the policy review meeting, covers the entire region of Halton in a uniform manner. The existing charge is $4,364 per residential unit and $1.11 per square foot of gross floor area for the non-residential charge. And as Mr. Teichman mentioned, the board proposes to consider passage of a new bylaw on May 16th, 2018. So I'm going to go over these next couple of slides quickly because a lot of it was mentioned either in the policy review presentation or by Mr. Teichman. But there are certain elements that the board must have to pass this EDC bylaw. So one of them is the EDC bylaw that's adopted under the Education Act, and it enables recovery of growth-related net education land costs only. So really what to take out of that is that these funds can't be used towards construction. They can only be used to purchase land for a new school site and then to prepare that land so construction can begin, but nothing towards the actual construction. Boards must meet an eligibility trigger to qualify for EDCs. So not all boards in Ontario automatically can impose EDCs. There must be a trigger that's met. It's met either by an enrollment to capacity trigger or by, if you have an existing bylaw, if you have a deficit in your reserve fund, then you automatically qualify for a new bylaw. This board qualifies on both triggers. And then, like I mentioned, EDC bylaws can be uniform or area specific. They can be single charge or different charges for different types of development, and they can be allocated to both residential and non-residential development. In terms of requirements, a lot of this Mr. Teichman went through, so I'll be brief. The board must prepare a background study with the included necessary requirements. The background study must be made available to the Minister and Ministry of Education. We've done both of those things. A total of 2 public meetings, or 3 for school boards that have existing bylaws, must be held prior to bylaw passage. So the policy review meeting that we just concluded was number 1. This is number 2, and then the 3rd public meeting will be when the board considers passage of the bylaw in May. The background study must be made available to the public at least 2 weeks before the first public meeting. We've done so, and as Mr. Teichman mentioned, we've given a clear 20 days notice of this public meeting. So with regard to the process and methodology involved in calculating EDC, it is largely technical, formulaic, and really driven by the legislation. In terms of steps that we go through, obviously I talked about boards have to qualify, so board eligibility. Demographics and projections, growth forecasts make up a big or form the basis really of the education development charge. Your reserve fund analysis, what is your current balance in your reserve fund, also plays in or factors into the EDC calculation. Your needs, ultimately that's a main driver of what your EDC charge is going to be. How many new schools does the board need? Net education land costs through appraisals and the cost of land in the region of Halton, we attach a dollar amount to those site needs, and that's ultimately how we determine the education development charge. So there's really 7 main steps that we talk about. The demographics and enrollment projections determine the need for us. The legislation, as well as working with your board planning departments, determine the number of school sites that we're going to need. The appraisals determine the costs. Historical expenditures in terms of site development determine our site preparation costs for us. As I mentioned, the reserve fund determines our existing surplus or deficit. Our total net education land costs, that's the amount that EDCs are collected for, are basically a sum of those first 5 steps. And like we mentioned in the policy review meeting, the policies that the Board of Trustees includes as part of their EDC really determines how you collect that charge. So when we talk about demographic trends, I mean, it's not a surprise, I think, to anyone that the region of Halton has been growing and growing quite significantly. One of the fastest growing regions in Canada over the last 15 years. And when we look at some of the trends, you can see that, population in 2001, around 370,000, about 550,000 now, major increases in dwellings as well, and that's resulted in increases in enrollment from both elementary and secondary for your board. When we look at what's expected to happen, when we look at the residential forecast, we expect what's been happening historically to continue. Still major development going on in the region of Halton, growing a little bit differently than we have historically. Places like Burlington that experienced significant growth, 10, 15, 20 years ago are starting to reach build out. Even places, south, central Oakville are starting to reach build out. New areas are growing in the region of Halton. Now still significant growth, but we're seeing North Oakville, Milton, areas in Halton Hills starting to grow. So we're still seeing significant units projected, about almost 86,000 additional units over the next 15 years. In terms of density type, we're starting to see that change a little bit, where we're starting to get a move away from traditional single-family ground-based homes, and in the region we'll start to see more townhomes, more condos starting to be built. On the non-residential side, still very significant non-residential development as well in the region. Lots of employment, and along with that, obviously non-residential floor space that will be built. So according to the region, about 87.5 million additional non-residential square feet will be built over the next 15 years. In the policy review meeting, I talked about certain exemptions that the board has to give. I talked about institutional uses that are exempt on the non-residential side. In addition, industrial expansions are also exempt. So you'll see on the slide in front of you that we're estimating about 87.5 million square feet, but we have to remove the square footage that is exempt. So what the charge is actually going to be divided over is about 65.5 million square feet. So from the demographics and from the growth forecast, obviously we get a projected enrollment. So when we look at your board's projected enrollment over the next 15 years, we expect enrollment to go from about 45,000 to about almost 62,000 over the next 15 years on the elementary side. And on the secondary panel, enrollment of around 19,000 expected to increase to over 22,000. And when you look at those slides, it shows the existing community enrollment as well as enrollment projected from new residential development. You can see that the numbers on the elementary, about 19,600, on the secondary, about 6,100. That's what's expected from the new residential growth that we're talking about. And when we talk about EDCs, those are really the students that we're collecting EDCs for. It's these students that are expected to come from this new residential development that we have to go out and buy new school sites for, and that's what the EDCs pay for. So this slide in front of you, really what I want to get at is really those bottom few numbers. So we project growth, we project our enrollment, we project how many students are expected to come from new residential development. But one step that we have to do is we have to say, okay, if we're expecting 19,611 new elementary students, how much space does the board have in their existing facilities now? And we have to use that space first. So you'll see at the bottom of each of those charts, on the left, it's the elementary panel, 19,611, but the board has about 2,400 available spaces in its existing schools. So those get taken up first. So the board actually collects for 17,170 elementary students. And on the secondary panel, the 6,100 projected for new development, you have 1,200 existing spaces that will get taken up first, and you have a net growth-related pupil place requirement of 4,900 students. And those are the students that we'll actually collect EDCs for. So once we know the net growth-related pupil places, we're going to know how many, and again, working with your board's planning department, we decide, okay, for that number of students, we're going to need X number of schools. Then, based on the number of schools and the capacity that we assign to those schools, the legislation tells us how many EDC acres we're eligible for. So the chart that we're looking at now basically shows you a school size on the left-hand side. So for elementary, 1 to 400, you're eligible for a 4-acre school site. 401 to 5, 5-acre school site, and so on. On the secondary side, if you had a capacity of 1 to 1,000 secondary school, you're eligible for a 12-acre site. And again, as the capacity increases, so does the size of the site you're eligible for. So with all that information, what did we determine? Well, we determined that the board will require a total of 22 new elementary school sites. 3 are already purchased and owned, and 5 new secondary sites. So once we know the number of sites, like we said on the chart that I just showed you, we know the number of acres. The next step is the board hires an appraiser to tell us what land is worth in the region of Halton. So what you're looking at now are the 3 areas. So Burlington's not included here because there's no future sites necessary. You see the 3 municipalities and the per acre values of those municipalities. So in Oakville, for an acre of land, you're looking at $2.37 million. To give you some context, in 2013, when we did the study, it was $900,000 an acre. And as you guys amend every year, so you guys are aware and you guys have had the chance to see sort of that annual increase and how much it's been going up. But in 5 years, you can see sort of what that's done. In Milton, about 1.8 million, and I think in 2013 is about 725,000 per acre. In Halton Hills, just under 1.6 million, and I think it was 625 in 2013. So you can see that your EDC is going up, but a lot of it is directly related to what's been happening to the price of land in the region of Halton. With regard to site preparation costs, so your site preparation costs, like I said, are the costs to develop your school site so that you can actually construct a school on it. Those are valued at $75,000, just over $75,000 per acre. And like I mentioned before, what we do there is we look at both boards, what your historical experience has been in terms of developing sites, and then we apply a per acre rate to that. So what does that mean for your new EDC charge? Well, it means that your total new proposed education land costs are going to be just over $466 million. Your reserve fund balance is $20.3 million. And I'll just mention to the trustees that in 2013, your reserve fund balance was, just give me 1 second here, was about $53.4 million. So just to talk a little bit about the value of amending that bylaw, there's a lot of boards that don't amend their bylaws, and that reserve fund balance just keeps growing and growing and growing because, as we saw, the price of land has been increasing significantly. So your board, by ensuring that there's a lot of factors that go into it, by ensuring that you're keeping pace with the rising land values, you've actually been able to reduce your reserve fund from $50 million down to a $20 million deficit. And that's just by keeping pace, by doing those amendments. So good on the board for doing that. So carrying through, so when we add those, that reserve fund balance, we're about $486.5 million. We add study costs to that for the next 15 years, and we get a total net education land cost of $486.88 million. As I mentioned earlier, we allocate those to residential and non-residential development. So 85% of those costs go to residential, 15% to non-residential. We then take that 85%, so that $413.85 million, we divide it over the 84,597 15 years of units that are projected to get our EDC rate of $4,892. On the non-res side, we take that 15%, so that's $73 million approximately. We divide it over the non-res square footage that we're forecasting and get a rate of $1.11 per square foot. So on the res side, your charge has gone up about 12%. On the non-res sides, it stayed pretty much exactly the same. The reason it's gone up on the res side and not on the non-res side, the residential forecast is pretty close to what it was in 2013. The non-res forecast has actually gone up in terms of square footage compared to what it was. So just more square footage to divide that charge over has resulted in the charge staying exactly, we're pretty much the same. Keeping in mind too that the charge, the $1.11, that's not gone up. That's the amendment that you guys did last year. If we compare it back to what it was in 2013, both the residential and the non-residential charge has gone up quite significantly. But again, because you guys are doing the amendment every year, you're sort of keeping pace with those rising costs. So the change between the 5 years isn't as extreme as if you didn't do an amendment every year. So that concludes the methodology and what the proposed rate is going to be. I'm just going to conclude by highlighting a couple of important dates. So March 23rd, as was mentioned, we had an EDC stakeholder information session. In mid-March, we actually released the background study to the ministry so they can start their review. They require 40 business days prior to the board considering passage. So they need at least 40 business days before the May 16th, 2018 date. That's been fulfilled. And then tonight, we're having, obviously, the policy review and the public meeting. Oh, sorry, early April, the study was released to the public. Tonight, we're fulfilling the two public meeting requirements, and then May 16th, you'll fulfill your last public meeting requirement and actually consider passage of the bylaw. Thank you very much, and if there's any questions with regard to the methodology or the rate, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you. We do have a question. Trustee Amos.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask what GFA stood for, but I found it as gross floor area.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, but so my actual question now is regarding the net growth related pupil places, because we will be actually going down with in secondary with the actual number of places. So that means if we do this again next year, it will be a different number because we'll have less potential spaces available?
Yeah. So the answer to that is possibly. The way it works when we do that calculation, it's not done on a board-wide basis. It's done on a review area basis. So If all your available space was in Burlington, where there's no growth-related needs, then it's not going to factor into that calculation. If the available space that comes available was where we had a growth-related need, then the answer is yes. So it would have to be in the review area where the growth is occurring and where we're identifying a growth-related additional site need.
Can I follow up? So just to be clear, so those growth-related people places need to be in Oakville, Milton, or Halton Hills to apply if we need to build there?
Correct. Yes. To be affected by available space, the available space would only impact those needs if they were in the same area where the needs were occurring.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Trustee Harvey Hope.
So, again, to be really clear, the 1,226 secondary spaces that you deducted from the 19,000, they're in Oakville, Milton, and Halton Hills.
Correct.
It ignores any available spaces in Burlington Secondary, either currently or projected, because Burlington is not a need for space.
100% correct.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no more questions at this point, I believe it's over to Mr. Teichman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just give a high-level overview of the mechanics of the bylaw, and I can do that pretty quickly. So we know that the bylaw imposes education development charges against land undergoing development. That's residential and non-residential land. The residential charge is applied on a per dwelling unit basis. A dwelling unit is defined as a room or suite of rooms that is designed or used for residential accommodation and has sanitary and culinary facilities, so kitchen and washroom. So that's what a dwelling unit would be. The way the bylaw is drafted now, the current bylaw as well as the proposed bylaw, the charge would apply to each dwelling unit. So the residential charge is proposed at $4,892. So if it's a single detached house, that's what it would pay. If it's a semi, it would pay two charges. If it was an apartment building or condominium building containing 100 suites, it would pay that charge times 100. So, well, each one would pay the charge. The charge is payable upon the issuance of a building permit, and it's collected by the local municipalities, and then remitted to the board. The non-residential charge, and Trustee Amos asked the question about GFA, gross floor area. So the non-residential charge is imposed on that basis every square foot of non-residential development. And gross floor area is defined as the measurements from the interior of the walls, not the exterior, because there's different efficiencies. So the charge is applied per square foot to the gross floor area. Above grade, below grade space is not subject to the charge. There are few exemptions in the bylaw. We heard about statutory and non-statutory exemptions. So what are exempt are municipalities, other school boards, and under the current bylaw, and we're proposing to carry this forward in the new bylaw, what's exempt are, so municipality, school board, public hospitals, publicly funded universities, community colleges, colleges of applied arts and technology, non-profit private schools are currently exempt, places of worship, cemetery or burying ground. I'm not sure they're big money makers. And also non-residential agricultural buildings. So if you have a farm, not the house, but the silos, the barns, those types of uses would be exempt. I mentioned the bylaws collected at building permit. The new bylaw, so the board is slated to consider passage of the bylaw May 16. Under the legislation, the bylaw comes into force on the 5th day after it's passed, or a later date, that's up to the board. So the 5th day after May 16 would be Monday, May 21st. We're trying to coordinate with the Catholic board. They would pass their bylaw on May 15, which is theirs is a Tuesday, this board is a Wednesday. So both bylaws, it's proposed, obviously subject to trustee approval, and direction, they would both come into force on Monday, May 21st. And on that day, the current bylaw, the bylaw which this board passed in 2013, would be repealed, so it'd be gone. And then same with the Catholic board. And I just wanted to point out, normally we hear from Build, and we haven't heard this yet, but maybe we will. They often ask for an extension, that the new bylaw, although it might be passed on May 16th, they'd say, give us more than 5 days, give us a month for transition or 6 weeks. We haven't heard that yet. Maybe we will. And if we do, we'd obviously come back to the board together with Mr. Renzella for direction on what we ought to do. But right now, the plan is May 21st, the new bylaws come into force. The old bylaws of the two boards are repealed. So that's 10,000 feet how the bylaw operates. Thank you.
Super, thanks very much. We do have a small speakers list. Trustee Graves, you're first.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to our speakers. I believe I know the answer to this question. I'm asking it primarily just for emphasis. But if an industry is primarily an outdoor operation, needing perhaps just a small set of offices, but a large outdoor developed area, are the EDCs still calculated only on the interior of the office space and not the developed land?
It's just measured on the interior of the building. So when you say outdoor storage? Outdoor storage? Oh, outdoor storage, no. If it's within a building, it would be, but if it's outdoor storage, then it would not. There's got to be a building around it to be subject to the charge.
Okay. For example, an intermodal.
A which, sorry?
An intermodal. I'm speaking of the CN intermodal specifically, where there would be a large area that they would use that is completely outdoors.
They would not be subject to the charge.
Thank you. Trustee Harvey Hope.
Thank you. Just for clarification, we've had the previous presentation mention tiny homes, and it had me thinking about alternate ways of housing people. So the renovated basement would be exempt because it's a renovation to a single-family property. If they built Grandma a shed in the backyard, I presume if I heard the dwelling unit correctly, and if it was allowed under municipal bylaws, and there's four or five different municipalities, so that's another issue. But and or if my she shed ever gets finished in the backyard, it needs a clarification, I guess, on the dwelling unit. So it requires bathroom facilities and cooking facilities. So as long as, and I'll just keep with the analogy, Grandma only sleeps out there but doesn't cook or doesn't have cooking facilities, and or the university students that come home, we're good as long as we keep it not a dwelling unit. Because I think the emphasis is here, I agree that the unit charges needs to be charged on anything where we could generate, also help generate children out of, and it doesn't really matter how big or small the apartment is, we could get children coming from them. And I think that's the idea of why there's no differentiation and why we're sticking with the uniform. Believe that is the theory behind why we're doing that.
Okay, thank you very much. I just had a quick question. And that is related to if there's misalignment with the other board. So for example, if they, for some reason, defer that decision, how would that impact us, if at all?
It wouldn't. It'd be if the Catholic board decides not to renew its bylaw or delay it. They can only delay it to June 24, because that's when the current bylaws will expire. But if they do, it'd be open to this board to still pass its bylaw on May 16 and have it come into force on May 21st. We just try and coordinate the two boards. for the administrative ease of the municipalities which collect the charge, but what they do is only binding on them, not this board.
Okay, super. Thanks very much. And thanks to all of you for all of this information.
The only way the other French boards that don't have an existing bylaw in place would have to have the enrollment capacity trigger. So their average 5-year projected enrollment on either the elementary or the secondary panel would have to be greater than their on-the-ground capacity. So my guess would be, and again, I don't have specific knowledge, my guess would be that most French boards probably have issues meeting that trigger. French boards that I've worked with in the past, again, off the top of my head, outside of the Ottawa area, usually have surplus space. So that would probably be an impediment to them qualifying.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so again, I would call trustees' attention to the electronic submission from Build circulated to board members this afternoon. Is there anybody else? So seeing no other speakers on this topic, that concludes the second public meeting. Could I have a mover for the following motion? Be it resolved that the Halton District School Board receive as information the methodology and proposed charges verbal report from Watson and Associates, and that the Halton District School Board receive as information the draft bylaw verbal report from Overland LLP, and that the Halton District School Board receive as information the written presentation regarding the proposed education development charges bylaw. That's moved by Trustee Oliver and seconded by Trustee Pappen. Right. Okay, so I'll look to your guidance. One interpretation is that when we waive the rules, we waive them to deal with the whole agenda item. Does that work for everybody, or would you like to waive? Okay, so seeing nods, then we'll continue with the voting. Thanks.
Because I put the first one on the agenda, which makes the second one out to be on the agenda.
Okay, excellent. So that is approved unanimously. Thank you very much for your votes, and thank you very much for the presentations. It was very informative, and not to mention all of the work that went on behind with the background reports and so on, and the meetings. So all the best for the stakeholder meetings going forward, and we will see you in a couple weeks. All the best. And thank you, General Manager Rinzella, also for being here and coordinating that process. Have a great night. Okay, so now we'll continue with the agenda. All right.
Do the motion to put the agenda on the meeting. Because you did for the first one, so in order to be consistent.
Okay, so in order to be consistent with the first part, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the second half of that public meeting. So moved by Trustee Daniele, seconded by Trustee Amos. Okay, thanks very much. That is approved unanimously. And I just want to acknowledge and thank again both of the presentations that took place. It was really information dense in both cases and lots of good news for the board. So moving on now to item 3.0, those are the consent agenda items. And is there a motion to receive and approve consent agenda items? Moved by Trustee Reynolds, seconded by Trustee Gray. And I'm going to look at the speakers list. We do have a speaker, Trustee Harvey Hope.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to have the board administered mobile cellular devices procedure pulled from the consent agenda.
Okay, excellent. So we'll pull that one, hold that one for discussion. Are there any other items? Okay, seeing none. Okay, hold on, please. Okay, so prior to the conclusion of the voting, would you ask your question?
So I guess my question was through the chair to Superintendent Truffin to perhaps elaborate on the Superintendent of Education versus the CIO possible. The representative, the person in charge of responsible in that procedure.
Sure, through the chair to Vice Chair. That's my title, Superintendent of Education of Information Services. I'm not Chief Information Officer. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I have a comment or a question as well. In conversation with the superintendent, we talked about aligning this procedure with the technology and you piece on the website by adding a comment in there to require that staff review the safe use guidelines of their technology.
Thank you. Happy to answer that, and I appreciate the question ahead of time because I'm happy to add that to the agreement that our employees sign. I've actually already added, if you're looking at the document, I added a sentence in Appendix A, number 2. The sentence will read now, in addition, staff with BAMCD shall read and follow the manufacturer's product safety guidelines, warnings, and suggestions for use, and that's very similar to what is on our technology and you website. I'm happy to add that tonight.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Okay, so now correcting my earlier error, moving back to voting on this item. So I'm just going to ask, just so people have the opportunity based on what they've heard, if they want to change their vote, I've reset. And now it's open for your voting on the consent items. Okay, great. And that is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, we are on to item 4.0. Those are the items for ratification and action. Was there any business transacted in private session?
No. No, there was no business transaction in private session.
Okay, awesome. Thanks very much. So we're moving on to 4.2. Those are action items for this evening. 4.2.1, school year calendar. I'd invite Associate Director Bogue. It's report 18042, revised version 2 on page 19 of your agenda package. Associate Director Bogue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the school year calendar report. Since we last spoke about it a couple of weeks back, trustees will recall that we did survey our parent community around a preference for October 5th and October 22nd. That data has been added to the report, so the overall response was that October 5th was preferred. In addition, it's my understanding in speaking to staff at our coterminous board that at last night's board meeting, they also landed on October 5th, and they did a consultation process as well. So the recommendation has not changed, and I'd be happy to answer any additional questions that trustees would have.
Okay, I'll put the question on the floor. Be it resolved that the Halton District School Board approve the summary of statutory and board designated holidays and professional activity days for 2018-2019 as recommended through consultation with the school year calendar committee and reflected in report 18042 revised. And that's moved by Trustee Pappen and seconded by Trustee Amos. And there is a short speakers list. Vice Chair Harvey Hope.
Thank you. I appreciate the consultation. Thank you very much for facilitating that. I just wanted to point out that is probably the only center mail sent out this school year that for some reason the trustees were not copied on all of them. So I actually did not receive what all the parents in my ward did, but happily there was a school council meeting and I did do a poll and they had all talked about filling it out that afternoon. And Ward 3 is traditionally a fan of the Friday before Thanksgiving, so I was pretty sure where my community stood on that, and I was correct. But just to point out that particular one, if we ever do that kind of consultation again, it would be probably useful to send the trustees that do not have children in the system, which I have been that this year, wouldn't know what was being sent out. And in other cases, we usually get the ones that the schools themselves sent out. We've been copied on all of those. So just a heads up on that. But thank you again.
Thank you. Trustee Pappen.
Thank you. Through the chair to Associate Director Bogue. I just wanted to thank you for all your work on this committee. As a trustee who sat on the committee, I know there was a lot of things involved over the last few weeks, and I appreciate the public consultation because I know we've done our due diligence in terms of letting our community know. So I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Graves.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, to Associate Director Bogue and everyone who was involved in that very brief, very quick survey. I just wanted to point out that 10,000 responses is a lot, especially when you think about we've got 60 some odd thousand students. Think about the number of families that is, right? If you maybe half that, maybe 30 to 40,000 families, and to get like a 25% response rate is really, in such a short period of time as well, is really great. And I unlike my colleague, I had no idea what the results would be. It was very clear. I was surprised at how clear it was that, 80% either preferred October 5th or had no preference. The 11% had no preference. And so I think we often talk about a silent majority, but in this case, it's really clear that there is a silent majority. And we will hear feedback about the October 22nd date. I have no doubt, but it's nice now to know what people, the majority of people really think on this issue, and that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So seeing no more speakers, I will. Okay. Okay, Trustee Gray.
Thank you very much. Through the chair and in following Trustee Graves' comments, how will this information be released to the parents in our community? We've had so much involvement by way of participating in giving direction to the Board of Trustees. Just wondering, what's the next step? How does this get out and into our community of parents?
Thank you for that question, Trustee Gray. The next step would be that our communications department will take this information now and we'll put together a bit of a synopsis and do a communications to the community. We typically, and because the Halton Catholic Board just approved their calendar last evening as well, we typically try to align our communications so that they go out about the same time because our calendars are aligned. So that is still pending ministry approval. This calendar also now officially goes off to the ministry for approval, but I don't anticipate any issues there. So hopefully, and we do communicate the calendar more than once. So this will be the first blast for our communities for planning purposes, and then there are additional calendar reminders throughout the spring and hard copies that go out with registration as well.
Thank you. Great question. Okay, so the motion is on the floor. There you go. Great, thanks very much. That is approved unanimously. Thanks so much, Associate Director Bogue, for the reports and Superintendent Blackwell and all that were involved in the survey and pulling all the pieces together, and not the least of which is the committee. So thanks very much. Thanks. Okay, so for the next topic, I'm going to be passing the gavel to Vice Chair Harvey Hope for item 4.2.2, Trustee Professional Development, Report 18057, revised, page 25.
Thank you, Chair Al Harrison. So next is 4.2.2, Trustee Professional Development, and it's your report, so please go ahead. I don't have it. So he wants to put the motion on the floor. Be it resolved that the Halton District School Board approve the use of up to $5,000 of the reserve account for trustee professional development for DISC training for trustees who are elected for the 2018 to 2022 term of office. This training will be scheduled to occur early in 2019. And I presume you'd like to move it. Chair Al Harrison, and a seconder. Trustee Gray. Any comments?
Okay, so briefly, this report is returning to you in a revised fashion to recognize the training for early in the next term. And I did check with Superintendent Veerman with respect to committing those funds for the next board, and that is an okay thing to do. So basically, as the motion says, we feel that it's important that this DISC training take place in terms of team building, and it will take place early in the next term so that the next board can reap the full benefits of that training. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly, can you put yourself back on? Thank you. Trustee Amos.
Thank you. While I support the intent of the motion for the DISC training, I'm wondering, sometimes there needs to be team building with senior admin, and I don't think this is a decision that this board should take, but I think it might be something that the next board should maybe speak to the director about whether it's done for everyone, because if everybody's working together as a team, it's not just the trustees, it's the whole senior admin.
Director Miller.
Through you, Vice Chair Harvey Hope, I would comment. I think that's worthwhile. This training for trustees is normally involves senior team as well. It's normally a staff. The person that delivers the training had mentioned that to us. So certainly we would, invite those conversations with the new board.
Thank you.
Trustee Collard.
Thank you. I do recall that in the last term, when we had some training that included both staff and trustees, that the portion of the training that was directed to trustees was paid out of the reserve account for trustee professional development, and the portion for staff was paid out of the board account. And I just want to clarify for the record that that would be the case, because the reserve account for trustee professional development must be used for trustees.
Vice Chair Harvey Hope to Trustee Collard. Absolutely. Yeah.
Trustee Amos.
I do have another question. While we can, as a board, commit the money to this endeavor, I'm not sure we can actually commit the board to it, because the board may make a decision themselves not to want to do that type of training. They may decide they want to do a different type of training. So I think all we can do is say we will commit the funds for them to do some type of a team building with this as a suggestion, and then with the further suggestion they discuss with the director to include the senior admin, but that we can't commit them as people to make the decision for them what type of team building they want, only as a suggestion.
Thank you. And I put myself on the speaker's list last. I agree with the comments. The motion does say approve the use of the money, so it does not talk about scheduling or when they're going to do it. I also think that perhaps by having this discussion now, the director can put his half of the budget into the budget discussion, perhaps, and make sure that he has room in his leadership portion. And we would then have the room for the trustee side. So I think we've by having the conversation now, we'll have all the pieces in place, and also knowing that it can be done sooner rather than later, because as we all remember, when we were brand new trustees, there's a little bit of a learning curve. That's an understatement. And so having a few things set up in place for what's going to happen in January is probably not a bad idea, or at least suggestions. Thank you. So with that, okay. Next speaker, Trustee Amos.
Thank you. So the motion does read for disc training, so I think it should, a possible amendment would be to for potential disc training or other type of team building exercise. I do think it needs to be an amendment, and I'm making a motion to amend, because I don't think we can force disc training on the next group. We can put the money aside with a suggested for disc.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to Chair Al Harrison for a comment.
Sure, thanks. So perhaps I would see this as a friendly amendment, and maybe we can just say, instead of just take out disc and say team building training, just a quick swap out of those words. The report, of course, describes disc as the option that we've researched, but of course then they would be free to research some other method. So I'm fine to make that say leadership training if others are.
Trustee Collard?
Thank you. I don't think we could just replace disc training with leadership training. I think if we are going to make it more open, we could say disc training or a suitable alternative, because not all leadership training would be comparable to disc training, and this was specifically the type of training that we wanted for the next board to have early in its term, so that it can work well together as a team. And so I would be more comfortable with not replacing the word disc, but rather adding or a similar alternative training.
Thank you, Trustee Collard. I also agree with Trustee Collard in that I think it should be the type of training, because it's not just team building. It was, in effect, the personality types and the way people work. And if the superintendents and the administration team are going to do DISC, we also wanted to make sure that it would be a good idea to stay on the same page. But I agree that DISC or comparable would be a good middle ground. And I am being told here that the chair is good with that as being a friendly amendment if Trustee Amos is as well. Yeah. Okay, so we have a friendly amendment to change it to DISC or comparable training, or DISC training, or not sure where the comparable goes. What was your way?
DISC training or alternative,
or
comparable
or a
alternative
suitable
training. Comparable
so, Manager Gortmaker, yeah, got it. Okay, thank you. This training is recommended to occur early in 2019. Is that also a friendly amendment? The training? Yes? Okay, I'm getting nods, so that's again, because we probably can't schedule the next board, but the idea is to tell them that we've put aside the money and we are suggesting this kind of training and we want to have it early. Is that true? Okay. Next topic. Okay, so vote, please. Trustee Reynolds, vote. Thank you. Okay, so that is not unanimous. We have a no vote from Trustee Reynolds. No? That was an error? Okay, so that's one of those red looked green. I got you. Red looked green. Okay, so Manager Gortmaker, that is to be unanimous. Thank you. And Director Miller, you had a comment you wish to make?
Thank you, Vice Chair Harvey Hope. I do have a comment. I want to applaud this Board of Trustees. There's not many Board of Trustees that would set aside their pot of money for the next board. And it's an expression of an understanding and empathy, but also an understanding of the complexity of the role of Board of Trustees. And I have never seen it. And I think it's a pretty cool thing you've done. So I want to applaud this board for thinking of those that are coming after you. Many of you, hopefully, well, however that works out, I guess I shouldn't make any kind of comment around that. But I think it speaks well to this board as part of your legacy that you think not just about the Board of Trustees, because one of the most significant things that this board does and us and the senior admin do, one of our largest responsibilities is succession planning and ensuring that the board carries on and be the successful board it is. And by your actions tonight, you're demonstrating your belief in that as well. So I want to thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Miller. We also have a subcommittee that has been struck, hasn't met yet, but has been struck, that will be working on succession topics for the new board. And we are currently collecting information and remembering all the things we thought we needed back then. So I will hand the gavel back to Chair Al Harrison.
Thanks very much. Moving on to item 5.0, communication to the board, and to another great report for the evening, student trustee report, item 5.1.
Okay, so we're going to start off by mentioning that we had our next drug policy working group meeting today. And there we had Chair Al Harrison, Superintendent Podjabarek, along with two community partners and a student senator present. So this meeting was really productive. We were looking to get some concrete recommendations to bring to the Board of Trustees. And we've started identifying like the specifics. However, what we're going to do is we're going to take those recommendations and actually have them hopefully focus grouped by our community partners and the people they work with, so that we have more than just student senate input, more than just people who are local to the board, but other students have been involved and affected by the issue of the use and abuse of drugs. And we hope to have these recommendations for the board to see in the next 2 months. Also, as you guys know, the student trustee election is coming up really fast. So next Tuesday, April 24th, is the election. Speeches will be delivered at the board office starting at 6 p.m. They're going to be live streamed. And voting will open around 7:45. We don't anticipate that the speeches will go any longer than that. Voting closes at 9 p.m. We've already started. Actually, no, sorry, that's Dr. Squirt.
So we've been doing a lot of work in terms of communicating that the student trustee election is happening to get the highest possible student voter turnout now that it's online. Today, for example, we sent out an email to all students in grades 7 to 12 to their HDSB emails, letting them know that on Monday, April 23rd, which is the day before the election, they'll be emailed an anonymous code and the link to the website where they can put in that code to vote. And it was a really cool experience clicking on an email that was sent to 30,000 students, all of the students in my school. A very interesting experience. We also sent out a letter to all of the parents of these students about the election and reminding to have them, like, to remind their students to check their email for the information, reminding them that the election's happening. We also wanted to thank the Associate Director Bogue for his help in communicating to administrators, as always. We've asked all schools to put in announcements, several announcements, asking students to check their emails for the information that the election is happening next Tuesday. We're working with our student senate to get as many students voting as possible. Many senators, particularly in the elementary schools, they're literally walking around to all of the classes. They're working with their student success teachers and the teachers at their school to go around to classes and tell kids to come and vote. High school students are bringing up at their student councils and putting it on social media. We created a one-page poster flyer that students have started to distribute. And we're also working with the IT team at the board to finalize the website where students will vote. It's almost finished. We've tested it. We've met several times with the team and are calling with them tomorrow to finalize the design of the website. And lastly, we're excited to announce that as of right now, we have 15 candidates for student trustee, which is a really great number. It's a much larger number than last year, 5 times the number, but we're happy to see that it's going up, and that's great progress. And then the last thing we wanted to mention is that we had a student senate meeting last Tuesday, so that's April 10th, I believe, and we're continuing to plan the Halton Youth Leadership Symposium, which is on May 31st. And another interesting announcement is every Senate meeting, we have our student representatives on the board level committees present an update to the rest of Senate as to what they've been working on those committees. And an interesting update is we have 2 elementary senators who are on the mental health steering committee, and those senators a couple meetings ago, they presented to Senate that the board is working on a new mental health strategy or plan, and asked for input on what the senators thought would be an important pillar or principle to bring up as a part of that mental health plan. And Senate pretty much unanimously agreed that suicide intervention needs to be there because it's one of the biggest things that we're seeing. So they brought that back to the committee, and it's now been integrated as a part of the board's mental health strategy. So those students have successfully brought up that pillar to be a part of the board's mental health plan. So we're really happy to see that. And that's just one of the ways that they've been bringing up student voice at those board level committees. And we're always happy to hear those updates. So yeah, that's our update for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustee Graves.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to our student trustees. Just wanted to say, as a parent, I received the email, and it was fantastic. And sometimes it's hard to pretend I'm a parent who doesn't necessarily know about these things. But from that perspective, I thought it was really well written. And in fact, I think you might see more engagement from students because, as a parent of a teenager, anyone who has teenagers can relate to this. They don't necessarily tell you what's going on. So for parents to have this and to be able to ask their children about it or talk with them about it, I think you're going to see more engagement, not even just this year, but in future years because of that. So excellent. Good job.
Thank you. Trustee Vice Chair Harvey Hope.
Thank you. Through to the student trustees. I sit on quite a number of staff type committees here at the board, and we've been seeing the student senators and particularly equity, and there's another one. Anyway, they're participating quite well, and they're the accessibility coordinating, that's the other one, that they are participating and that they're actively involved and are up on the topic. So I think it's been a really good improvement to have the student voice right there at the committee level, because that's where a lot of this, the work gets generated and ends up in the board reports later. But that's where the discussion happens. So it's great that they're there and that they're finding a way to fit in 8:30 in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon meetings and still keeping up with their schoolwork. So kudos to them for that.
Thank you. Trustee Oliver.
Thank you. Again, I want to congratulate you for the tremendous work that you've done this year. You've certainly brought the student voice even further forward for us. And as a trustee rep on the Mental Health Steering Committee, I do want to acknowledge and commend the two student senators. They truly do come in fully prepared and standing up for the students and bringing the student voice to the table and making us really consider it, incorporate into the work that the steering committee is doing. So thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no other speakers, I just wanted to reiterate the thanks for all of the great information in the report and all of the work that goes on behind the scenes. Thank you. So we're moving on to item 5.2. There are no items for action May 2nd, 2018. So yet, 5.3 for information, April 18th. Are there any notices of motion? Trustee Collard.
Thank you. I have a notice of motion to bring forward on behalf of the Policy, Bylaw, and Governance Committee regarding the Director of Education job description and the delegation of authority and executive limitations. We will be bringing forward a motion at the next meeting regarding adopting the recommendations made by legal counsel.
Super. Thanks very much. Are there any? Yes, Trustee Harvey Hope.
So I think I've confused a different, it's okay. Never mind. Sorry.
No worries. I am confused all the time.
So
on to item 5.5, Director's Report.
Thank you, Chair Al Harris. You've confused me. I've got 4 items tonight. The first one I will turn to Associate Director Bogue, who will talk very briefly about some of the capital projects that we are deferring in order that we can more coherently and efficiently finish many others and defer some from next year. So he will give you a brief update on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Miller. Through you, Chair, to trustees, we have deferred some projects this year. This is pretty typical. Last year we had about $37 million worth of work to be completed over the summer, and we tried to squeeze a lot of that work in, as you know, over 2 months in the summer, and deferred some of that work. This year we started with about $38 million, plus what was deferred the previous summer, to bring a total of around $44 million worth of work, and we have deferred about $12 million. So again, we typically do defer some work because of complexity of we bundle projects together, and sometimes 2 projects that are happening in the same part of a building just can't happen at the same time and in that 2-month window. This year we've also experienced a little bit of pressure in the facilities department around being down a couple of key staff members. So that work that gets deferred will go on next year's work and will happen at that point in time. So I have a number of different projects. I think if trustees are, we can send that out, and if you've got some questions, we can certainly let you know the rationale around why. Some of them might be self-evident, but rather than getting into all of them, there's quite a number in a variety of different schools.
What I would suggest is we will send a list out to trustees, and if you have questions that you want in the public domain, ask them in trustees' comments and questions at the next board meeting. If it's not necessary for it to be in the public domain, then just fires the question, and Associate Director Bolt will answer them.
We have a question. Vice Chair Harvey Hope.
Thank you. So that list that ends up in the carryover, it will come up when we talk about probably in May sometime when that report comes up that usually gives us the whole list of the capital projects. And there's usually a carry forward black box at the top. And I'm wondering whether maybe this year that even just the names of the projects that add up to that 12 million could be somehow be shown, because there's always been a concern sometimes that what was in last year's carry forward is in this year's carry forward. And so that those of us, the trustees often go down, dig into the details and say, okay, that school, all of my carry forward ones got done and I just have a new list. But for the public, it's carry forward with, 12 million and carry forward at the other end at 12 million. And you kind of wonder if it's the same 12 million or whether or not it's just the standard summer carryover things. So rather than necessarily asking the trustee comments in the next thing, I would rather also see a little more detail in that particular report that comes sometime in the spring. I remember seeing it. It's not a new request. I've asked for it in the past.
Yes, we will do that. I now want to turn to Superintendent Blackwell, who will talk a little bit about an exciting event tomorrow.
Thank you. Through the chair, we have, as you recall, we've approved the iSTEM concept, or you've approved the iSTEM concept for Aldershot High School, and for the implementation of September 2019. And one of the things that we heard from the people that were able to give us ideas and were involved in that engagement and consultation process is they wanted to come back once a concept was put in place. So tomorrow we're really excited. We have approximately 80 people coming. From corporate businesses, from nonprofit, community, post-secondary institutions. We've got people coming from the ministry. We've got people that are very connected with STEM nationally. Canada 2067 STEM framework is something we'll be looking at. We have Aldershot staff coming, and we have board staff coming. We have parents, and I think that's pretty much everybody, all the gamuts in the area. But we have people coming from across the province that are going to come in and offer some ideas for us. And we're calling it a think tank. We're really excited. We're starting with that little video, if you recall, the future of school, the 1 minute. This is a car. This is a phone. This is a classroom. That will be an engagement piece, and we're also going to tap into the resources of people that are working outside of our school system, because we know that we've got some pretty cool opportunities to have this program extend beyond the walls of Aldershot High School and work within our communities. So we do have Kevin Raposo, who is here, our videographer in the house tonight, is also going to be there tomorrow. So he will be capturing an event recap style video, so we'll be able to share that at the board meeting. But we're really excited about the possibilities tomorrow. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Mercedes-Benz in Burlington, who's donating the space for us for free. Okay.
Thank you, and we always give a shout out to Mercedes-Benz. I want to brag a little bit about our staff, our employees, and so on. There are 38 boards in Ontario, 34 English public. Well, there's 72 total, but 38 public boards, 34 English and 4 French. And all of those boards have dozens and dozens and dozens of schools, thousands of schools in this province, and they all have principals. And those principals belong to the Ontario Principal Council. And every year there's a president of the Ontario Principal Council who's elected, who represents all the principals and vice principals in the entire province. It's a significant role. I'm very pleased to inform the board and the public that next year's president of the Ontario Principals Council will be the Halton District School Board's very own Larry O'Malley, who is currently the principal of Garth Webb Secondary School. So I wanted to congratulate Larry and acknowledge the great, it's a real feather in the cap of this board, a bigger feather in the cap of Larry, so well done, Larry, but I think all of us at the HDSB are very proud of what he's accomplished, and he will represent principals and administrators well, but he will also represent the HDSB very well around his province. So the second one is another kudo. All the people on the outer ring, except the corporate side, are all members of the Ontario College of Teachers. And they have various council members from various representations, principals, teachers, etc. And for the first time that I am aware of, a teacher from the Halton District School Board has been elected to the Council of the Ontario College of Teachers for a term of office from July 1st, 2018 to June 30th, 2021. And that teacher, some of you know her around this board, all the people on the outside know her, is Paige Bennett. Paige Bennett is works in our system, and she's been in our student services for many, many years. She was also a vice principal for some time. So congratulations to Paige. We're really proud of what she's accomplished. And again, it's another feather in the cap of the Halton District School Board, considering all the boards. And now that includes all 72 boards and many private schools in the province, and yet one of our teachers has been elected to be a counselor at the Ontario College of Teachers. So well done, Paige. I know you're watching because we told you to watch, so thank you. And that's the end of my report.
Okay, well, thanks for all of the great news, and congratulations to one and all. Now it's item 5.6, communication from the chair, and I just have a few remarks since I don't get to do this report really often. So I left everybody a pencil, and I just wanted to explain. This week is World Creativity and Innovation Week, started by a Canadian, Marcy Siegel, in 2001. The overall purpose is to free up, encourage, and remind people to use their creativity for innovation that makes the world a better place and makes their place in the world better too. So a challenge has been put out through Superintendent Newton to track all of the creativity and innovation happening in Halton. So please do watch #HDSB Innovates for some really good stuff. Today's also the International Day for Monuments and Sites, and you might think, hey, why is that important? It was approved by the General Assembly of UNESCO in 1983 to promote awareness about diversity of cultural heritage of humanity, their vulnerability, and the efforts required for their protection and conservation. So I challenge everybody to think, what is the most impactful monument to you that you've seen either locally or in your travels? Near and dear to my heart is Earth Day 2018, which is happening on April 22nd. This year's theme is End Plastic Pollution. The use of plastics grows exponentially, so Earth Day is a challenge for all of us to also expend our resources exponentially to combat plastic pollution. And lastly, it's National Volunteer Week in Canada, and I know that Vice Chair Harvey Hope has something to say about that, but I also just want to thank all of the local volunteers in our schools. This year's theme is celebrating the value of volunteering, building confidence, competence, connections, and community. And our volunteers really do all of these things and have a lasting and positive impact on students. So back to the pencils. To recognize these days, pencils and pens are simple tools that do great things. Use them to record your ideas, to help shape your visions, and to further peace, gratitude, and innovation in the HDSB and beyond. So, moving right along, item 5.7 is committee reports. And does anybody have any of those? The rush. Okay. Trustee Daniele.
Thank you. I would just like to express my thanks to all the trustees who attended the Ontario Public School Board Association Central West meeting, and particular thanks to Principal Dan Albrecht for all his support, as well as Superintendents Newton and Truffin. Very, very much appreciated all of your help on that, and a huge thanks goes out to the Welcome Center as well for their support of that day. So thank you all. It was a very good day for those who could attend.
Thank you. Trustee Gray.
Thank you very much. The Audit Committee met yesterday afternoon, and among the items discussed was the Regional Internal Audit Plan for 2018-19. The recommendations around this audit plan, along with other items, will come forward for review and discussion and approval at one of the upcoming Board of Trustee meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Reynolds.
Thank you. Just to let all trustees know, the subcommittee of Inspire Awards met today with staff, and we will be requesting some additional time at our next committee of the whole meeting to bring forth a further discussion. We're not at this time able to make a recommendation. We're still gathering details, but we would request that we have a little bit more time on the next agenda, please.
Okay, great. And that is a nice segue into the Committee of the Whole agenda upcoming. There are no other speakers at this time, so I just wanted to let everybody know that next week's committee meeting is really jam-packed. We have the LTAP, Long-Term Accommodation Plan, will be coming in draft form from staff. We have a brief budget discussion. We have a circle back on a few items, election communication restrictions and the anaphylaxis topic. And Trustee Reynolds, maybe you can just let me know whether Inspire needs to be on this agenda or a subsequent one. And then lastly, we have a good chunk of time for a professional development piece. Okay, so seeing no other speakers on committee reports, trustee questions and comments. Trustee Gray.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of things just to report tonight. I wanted to report that M.M. Robinson and Georgetown District qualified just recently for the World Championships in the robotics, which I believe is happening in Kentucky maybe later this Detroit. I'm sorry, wrong state. Detroit. Wrong area. Okay. Out by a few hundred kilometers. Anyway, off to Detroit, and very, very happy for them. I noticed that Georgetown District has not been in this competition for very many years, and as a result, Siemens have stepped up to provide some financial support for that team in its early years. The second part I wanted to report tonight was just on behalf of the Halton Learning Foundation. Eliminating Barriers has, to date, provided over $157,000 to 767 students in the Halton Board. Last year, the HLF supported 811, and they're currently on pace to support over 1,000 students. So the need, of course, has grown quite significantly. Also, the HLF invited Jumpstart Canadian Tire Charity to present opportunities to school program leaders and regarding individual student funding, and 18 school administrators were present and asked several questions. So we're hoping for a very strong liaison to and growth of that program with our teachers. And finally, regarding the payroll campaign in the Halton District School Board, thank you all to all of the staff who participated in this year's payroll campaign. There were 35 new staff members choosing to donate, making for a total of 165, and in that we have over $52,000 was donated to the HLF. So a great start going into this year, and again the need grows, so it's very, very welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Gray. Trustee Pappen.
Thank you, through the chair. The Halton Music Showcase took place on April the 12th. at the First Ontario Concert Hall. Students began rehearsals in February in preparation for the spring concert. Special thanks to Superintendent Salmini for emceeing the event and student trustee Mansour for sharing the honoring of the land acknowledgement. Performances included stage bands, concert bands, jazz groups, and choirs. I would like to send a shout out to Mr. David Whelms of Abbey Park, who brought their spring ensemble for the first time. A highlight of the evening featured a performance by a large student choir made up of over 300 students from across Halton. It was almost the size of a small school in Halton. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustee Graves.
Thank you. This morning, Trustee Daniele and I attended an announcement made by Mitzi Hunter, who we know in her former role as Minister of Education, but this was in her new role as Minister of Advanced Education and Skills Development. And the announcement gave Wilfrid Laurier University and Conestoga College the green light and $90 million to go ahead and start to build a university campus in Milton. So we're all very excited. This is great news for Halton. So just congratulations to everyone involved, and we look forward to future potential partnerships. It's really exciting the way that Milton Education Village is all going to come together. There's some great plans there for very innovative design and thinking. Thanks.
Thank you. Trustee Harvey Hope.
Thank you. I'm just going to expand a little on what Chair Al Harrison said about National Volunteer Week. Our students have the effect of thousands of hours of volunteering. We appreciate all of the hours that volunteers from outside the school, volunteers of staff time inside the school, outside of school hours. And I also want to thank my fellow board members the opportunity to volunteer as your vice chair tonight. So I think that was in keeping with the volunteer week. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair Harvey Hope. So seeing no more speakers, I too wanted to thank Trustee Vice Chair Harvey Hope for being by my side tonight. It was really excellent working with you in this regard. So thank you. And seeing no other speakers, is there a motion to adjourn?
Oh, that's a surprise.
Trustee Gray is very efficient. And Trustee Amos. Okay. Do you want to do it?
Yes. Time to vote. And we've done this before 9 o'clock. So
By 1 minute.
maybe we can go see someone sing.
Trustee Pappen? Okay, and that passes unanimously. We are adjourned. Thanks, and have a great night. Good job. You're welcome.